Today, we are going to explore how to do stuff through CLI and files written in declarative format. And we are going to do that in Codefresh. We are going to try to create a pipeline to set up the resources we need, authentications, what's or not, and even observe the results of a pipeline in Codefresh without UI. Now, there is a long explanation why that might be a better choice in some cases or not, and I will not go through it because I don't have enough time. Instead, I wrote an article that goes in much more depth of what I'm going to show you right now, and I encourage you to read it, but don't do it now, do it after you're finished watching this video. And the article is called "Samurais Don't Use UIs." And so there are ninjas in it, and samurais, and UIs, and CLI, and terminal. You must be interested in reading about how to combine all those things. Ninjas. Anyways, read it afterwards to get much more detail. So what else? Yes, my name is Victor, and I work for Codefresh. I'm something over there, some kind of architect. I'm not sure. Anyway. My name is Victor, I work for Codefresh. So what else? Yes, so we are going to go through the steps to manage everything you need to run a Kubernetes-based pipeline from Codefresh by using CLI and some files without ever touching UIs, right? You're probably not used to that, so it might be interesting. Let's go. So let me switch to my terminal and we can get going. We can see what we can get. Okay, so what do I have? First of all, what do I have? I have a Kubernetes cluster and I have stored in an environment variable Codefresh token. That's the only thing I have. A token and the Kubernetes cluster. Everything else I might need will be created right now in front of you, right? Everything live. So the first thing I need to do is to tell my CLI, Codefresh CLI, which I installed earlier, so I cheated a bit, how to authenticate with Codefresh SaaS. And I can do that with Codefresh out command, and then I want to create context, and I'm going to call that context DevOps catalog. And I'm going to give it API key, and API key is stored in CF token variable. Simply, I do not trust you, so I cannot output my token for you here. That's how unworthy you are, or paranoid I am. Depends how you look at it. Anyways, I created a context so that my CLI knows how to connect with Codefresh in a secure way. What else do we need? We need to set up a Kubernetes cluster in a way so that Codefresh gets sufficient permissions. And you know how to do that probably, but anyway, I'm going to show you the file that will do that. So create cluster YAML, right? So I'm going to create, what do we have here? I'm going to create a namespace, Codefresh, and then inside of that namespace, not actually inside because cluster role is cluster wide, I'm going to create a cluster role, Codefresh, which will give me permissions to do anything with any type of resource. And by anything, I mean get, list, watch, create, update, patch, delete. Now, you should not do this. Never, ever, ever do this. Be more restrictive in what you think should be allowed and what shouldn't. But today I'm taking the easy route and letting Codefresh have very wide permissions. I'm going to create a service account. This is the key. It's going to be called Codefresh, and I'm going to bind that service account with the role I discussed earlier. So cluster role binding so that Codefresh role is bound to the service account Codefresh, right? So this is, think of it as a user, right? That will be used. That's how Codefresh will authenticate with the cluster. So how do I do this? You know, this kubectl apply, and then file name is create cluster, right? So I created my service account, and there we go. and that should be it from Kubernetes side, right? I have a user or a service account that will be used by Codefresh. What else? I need to tell Codefresh where is my cluster, right? And to enable it to connect to it, right? Right now, I just added a service account inside the cluster, but I need to tell Codefresh, hey, this is where my cluster is. So what I'm going to do first of all is to export current context. And that is basically, I'm going to take a look at kubectl config current context and store the current context in the current context variable. And this is where my kubeconfig is pointing to right now. And then I'm going to tell Codefresh, you know what, Codefresh, create a cluster. It's a very unfortunate command. We are not going to create a cluster. Means create a record of a cluster, of my cluster in Codefresh. And I'm going to pass it the reference to the kube context. So because in my kubeconfig I might have many clusters, and I'm going to tell Codefresh, hey, the current context is the one that should be used as the cluster. And then I'm going to tell it, hey, service account should be Codefresh. That's the account you should use when connecting to that cluster. And also the namespace where that service account is called Codefresh. So in other words, I'm telling Codefresh that it should create a record of my cluster based on the current kube context, and that it should use that specific service account in that specific namespace. Let's see it. There we go. And if I do Codefresh, get clusters, you can see now that my cluster, that's how uninventive I am. That's how much I lack creativity. My current cluster is called my cluster, and right now Codefresh knows about it, right? What else do we need? We need to tell Codefresh how to connect to our Git account. In this case, I will be using GitHub, so I will tell Codefresh how to connect to my GitHub account. So let's take a look. Codefresh get contexts, because it is one of the contexts. And you can see that right now I don't have much. I have this is not really important. I have a GitHub account already set up with my Codefresh account. But I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to create a new one to show you how that works. Imagine that this is the first time you're using Codefresh, at least from CLI. So what I did before is that I already created a GitHub token. I have a token. I will not show you how to do that. I will assume that you know how to do that. So I'm going to say Codefresh create context. And context is of type Git, and subtype or type of Git context I want today is GitHub. It could be Bitbucket or GitLab or what's not. And I'm going to call that context DevOps catalog. And the access token that should be used, the one that I generated before this recording in GitHub, is already stored in GH token variable, right? I don't want to show you my tokens. That's simply how it is. So I hopefully created. Something always fails. Oh, okay, this worked. So Codefresh get context, and now you should see that I have a GitHub context, a new one called DevOps catalog, besides the one that I had before. Okay, what else do I need? My pipelines, it's not a requirement, but pipelines should be organized inside of projects. So I'm going to create a new project for the pipeline. And I'm going to do that with Codefresh create project. And I'm going to call it DevOps catalog. Think of projects as logical groups of pipelines. Okay. I already did that before. I actually used this project for other cases, but if you're doing this for the first time, you would not see an error. You would see, hey, success. So let me output Codefresh get projects. And you can see that I have only one project, DevOps catalog, and I already have 3 pipelines, but those are not the pipelines we are interested in right now. We're going to create a new one, in my case, the 4th one. Okay, now we are finally got to the important part, and that important part is creating a pipeline itself. That's why we are here, right? So I have an original copy of the pipeline I want to copy use, so I'm going to copy that to the root of this repo, and let me show you how that looks like. So here's the pipeline, and so this is basically a standard, nothing really special pipeline. It's a pipeline, some metadata with a name. This is the project where it's going to be located, the one that I almost created earlier, and this is how the pipeline will be called. Again, the project triggers. We are going, this pipeline will be triggered from GitHub whenever there is a change in the repository vfr6/Codefresh CLI. And it will be triggered only when I push changes to the code. It can be triggered by other actions. And it will be triggered only if there is a change to the master branch. And then we have steps. I'm not going deep now into pipelines. I don't want to show you everything it can do, just to demonstrate that we can do it through CLI and through files defined and stored in Git. So I'm going to have only 2 steps. First, I'm going to clone the code and to clone the code, I'm going to use the Git context that I created a few moments ago. And then I'm going to execute a few commands. For that, I'm going to use Codefresh kubectl image, and those commands will be use context and get namespaces. So what I really want to do with this is, first of all, to show you that when we create a cluster in Codefresh, all of those clusters are automatically added as kube contexts inside of our steps. So we need to select which one do we want to use. I could have 100 clusters configured, right? So I'm telling the pipeline, in this case, to use the Kubernetes context called my cluster. That's the one that I created a moment ago. And to list all the namespaces, only to demonstrate that this all works. This is not a really full-blown CD pipeline, what's not. Let me just double check. Yeah, my cluster. Excellent. So let's see. Let's create that pipeline. Let's tell Codefresh that this pipeline exists. And this is Codefresh create pipeline. And the -f for name is codefresh.yaml. So telling Codefresh, hey, this is the pipeline you should be using. Will it work? Oh, so far so good. So let's see, Codefresh get pipelines. I have some pipelines from before, but the one that really matters is this one. This is the pipeline I just created. And still, I haven't entered the UI even once, right? Everything through CLI. So I just created a pipeline. Now let's see whether all this works. And by all this works, I mean not only that I created a pipeline, but Codefresh, using the information I provided before, should have created a webhook that should be triggered whenever I push something to the master branch, because that's the trigger I told it to create. So I want to run this pipeline. I want to run a build of this pipeline. I could, of course, click a button in the UI to run a build. I could tell it through CLI, run this build, but I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm going to commit changes to this very same Git repository. Here it is. This is the Git repository I'm using. I'm going to commit changes and see whether that triggers the pipeline I just created a moment ago. So git commit -m something, a message, right? And git push. So let's take a look at whether the build was created. Codefresh, what do we want? Get builds, and the name of the pipeline name is code, what is the name? Codefresh CLI, I think is the name, right? There we go. The build is already running. Yeah! Export build ID. I'm going to export this ID. I will need it a moment. So let's take a look at the logs. Codefresh logs -f build ID. Let's take a the logs. Look at the logs. Is it working? Is it working? Oh, build ID -f. Wrong order of stuff. Here we go. Here we go. And it's finished already. So what did it do? Let's take a look at the last step. This is the list of all the namespaces in my cluster. And you can see that it outputted. That means that, and before that, it cloned the code somewhere here. It cloned the code. So what that means is that when we created a context from CLI, and told Codefresh how to connect to the GitHub account, it did that successfully. And it created a webhook that triggered this build in the first place. So that part worked. And the fact that it output all the namespaces, that means that it successfully used the context, kube context, that we passed to Codefresh, and then it had sufficient permissions in this case to output all the namespaces. Hey, we did it. Did they enter the UI? I didn't. Was I lightning fast? Debatable. I mean, for my abilities, I was fast. And this is how you do stuff. And all everything's secrets were created using CLIs. But the definition, like of the pipeline, that's stored in Git, right? So I did use CLI to tell Codefresh that the pipeline exists, but it is defined as code, and it is in this Git repository. So that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that this was somehow useful. What else can I say? Yes. As I said before, gist with the commands that I executed is in the comment section. The article that explains this in much more depth. It's a long one, a huge one, and remember, it has ninjas and samurais in it. And the link to that article is in the comments section. What else? That's it. We just proved that we can do everything without going through UI. That does not mean that UIs are bad. UIs are great for many different things. But let's say that sometimes you might want to do things without going to the UI. Some of the things, if not all. And this is how you do it. Thank you so much. Hey, one more thing. Yes. Remember to put the thumbs up if you like the video. And remember to subscribe to get the new notification about the new one. Cheers. Until next time.